Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 7th presentation in our series, What Were We Thinking? If you've been following us, you'll see that we're kind of fluttering like a butterfly from topic to topic, hopefully enjoying this very crooked meanderings between diversity of responses offered to the questions posed. When we start considering what kind of thinking brought us to this point of environmental crisis, if there is indeed one, and what kind of thinking differently can we imagine? I mean, not necessarily for the future, but actually for right now. So I'm very happy to introduce to you today Werner Smith, a doctoral candidate from the University of Fort Hare. Werner specializes in contemporary phenomenology, and his current research focuses on altered states of consciousness and frameworks of exceptional experience. So based on the claim that to think differently is to be differently, in his presentation today, he claims that we are, as Heidegger's Dasein, kind of being there in the world, we must wake up to our possibilities. And this is going to mean some form of radical conversion, which is articulated in the work of another philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre. And it's going to have to involve a move away from any kind of rigid and dogmatic thought. So Werner says that this radical conversion calls for such a change in being that existence in its previous form becomes unfeasible. And this abyssal leap into being differently can be facilitated by experiences of altered states of consciousness offered by psychedelics and meditation. So, I wonder what Nietzsche would say to this. But let's leave those speculations to question time and first hear what Werner has to say. So thanks so much for joining us, Werner, and over to you.
All right, thank you very much. I hope that you can see my slides again.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, I'm getting the slideshow going. All right. Firstly, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Andrea. You have done half of my job for me already. What's left is to essentially flesh out what Andrea has presented, and I aim to do this with two main aims, so to speak. So as you can see on the next slide, next to Sartre's mug there, firstly, to show that being different in the world necessitates a knowledge of the possibility of such a difference. In other words, the realization that existence and therefore the thinking about existence is not stuck in the rigid structures many may believe that it is, but it is indeed superfluous. And to show how the Sartrean concept of radical conversion is a suitable theoretical backdrop for the discussion of the potential of altered states of consciousness to facilitate the ontological shift in consciousness that Sartre believes is necessary for this type of being different in the world. So it should be said that mentioned in the abstract, two things. One, from the onset, that I do not aim to re-articulate the totality of More's work on racism and Black existentialism in my utilization of More's representation of Sartre's theory, which is now layers within layers within layers. But the practical sense of this is simply just that More has already done the job of taking all the fine little lines that Sartre has, I guess, sprinkled between his various works in his lifetime in regards to the radical conversion, and wrote them in a more structured and more systematic way, addressing his central project. And I just make use of that. As I mentioned, More had already done the job. I don't need to go and redo this job. Then the abstract mentions both psychedelics and meditation. And as abstracts tend to go, I wrote that before I wrote the actual talk. And I must admit that I am predominantly going to speak about psychedelics, but it should be kept in mind that a lot of the phenomena that I will mention aren't exclusive to altered states of consciousness that are linked to the psychedelic experience specifically, but may also be experienced during other phenomena such as mindfulness meditation, such as flow states in performative art and extreme performance, etc. Then altered states of consciousness as facilitators for this ontological shift that I will speak about, as I mentioned, can be seen in many ways, but I think what is the most relevant for the current seminar series would be a discussion in regards to what I will call, or what is called, nature relatedness, and the increase of this among participants of psychedelic studies. So this is going to be the practical case that I'm going to apply the theory to see a theoretical shift of sorts. All right, that being said, let's get into it. So the first question would then naturally be, what is the radical conversion?
Werner,
So,
sorry to interrupt you, but your
yes.
slides are not moving on.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. No, it's fine. Are they moving now?
No.
Okay, so I guess it's the same thing that Emma had, where the animations aren't coming across.
I think, Werner, you need to share your other
Okay,
screen.
how do I go
We
out
can
of the
see,
slideshow?
we can see your PowerPoint screen, but not your shared screen, if that makes sense.
Sorry, I don't use Windows, and now I'm using Windows. There we go. Okay, can you see my screen that is not a slideshow right now?
Yes, we can see that.
Yes. Can you see inside PowerPoint? Okay, we're just gonna have to do it like this, if that's okay. I'll zoom it in.
Okay.
Okay, so those are just the 2 points that I'd already mentioned regarding the objectives, and this is then the slide that I had shifted to when Andrea brought it to my attention that this is not visible. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, great. So then to continue where we were, from the onset, these are the two general definitions of the radical conversions that I'll make use of. The one comes from More, and he puts it rather straightforward, and this is why I think it's so useful. So for More, the radical conversion in Sartre is a ontological or ethical transformation of the individual from the clutches of bad faith and inauthenticity to that of an authentic existence. Another definition can come from the work of Kerry S. Walters, American philosopher, in which he says that it's a readjustment of the individual's fundamental project, so extensive that it changes their being in the world. So what I'm hoping to do is unpack both of these definitions in line with More to elucidate exactly what is meant when we speak of radical conversions, because there's a few things in these two definitions that jumps forward, right? Firstly, what would be considered bad faith or inauthenticity, and then the opposite of that within Sartre, and what is the fundamental project itself. So in that sense, More says, sorry, I just want to do this. More says that in Sartre, instead of necessarily being given a specific definition of what authenticity is, Sartre discusses this by means of negation. So we are given the opposite of authenticity, right? We're given inauthenticity. And in this sense, you can even make the argument that being in nothingness is a phenomenological analysis of the phenomena of bad faith, right? And how to get out of bad faith, so to speak. So here, Sartre suggests that there's a few, More suggests there's a few fundamental things we need to look at when we look at authenticity within Sartre. One, authenticity as a self-recovery from corrupted being. And we need to know what that corrupted being is. Then authenticity understood in the terms of the human condition, and then the so-called fundamental project, and how this is implicit in the desire within the for itself, which is everyday being, Dasein, to be God. So in this sense, authenticity means a self-recovery from the corruption of being, but a corrupted being in the phenomenological sense of the human condition is a being of bad faith, essentially. So bad faith here is, within classic existential phenomenology, a denial of the nature of reality for Sartre. And this nature of reality is a contingency of freedom. So what this basically means then, within realization of the non-rigidness, the non-supportedness, the superfluidity of reality, comes the realization of freedom. And this is what we ought to move towards. But okay, that sounds like a lot of things that need unpacking. So let me try and do that. So according to More, it is bad faith that renders human reality a unhappy consciousness. And this state of unhappiness is precisely the reason why consciousness needs to be recovered from the corrupted condition of bad faith. But we need to somewhat understand what, firstly, the corrupted being is then, and how we will recover it. The recovery from this bad being will become what we understand as the radical conversion. So in Sartre's War Diaries, preceding Being and Nothingness, Sartre makes the notion that authenticity can only be understood in terms of the human condition, and the human condition, insofar as we are all free and contingent beings, is our desire to become God. What is meant by this, it's a metaphor. It is not a literal desire to be some creative being that creates everything, but it is a desire for such a power, because it's a desire to be a being that necessitates its own foundation. So this is the in itself becoming the for itself. So in order to understand this, we need to understand what the for itself is. And the for itself is a being that lacks justification, that lacks foundation, and that lacks necessity. In other words, this is the main character in Nausea when he looks at the roots of the chestnut tree, and he realizes profoundly and deeply that the ground on which he had thought to have stood up till this point is pure nothingness. There's no necessity for his existence. But because there is no necessity for his existence, this nothingness also gives him the contingency of freedom, right? So the in itself is the being which necessitates its own foundation, and the for itself is the being with a unjustifiable foundation. And Sartre says the human condition is this desire that is called the fundamental project of wanting to become God by uniting the in itself in the for itself. So if we were successful somewhat in becoming both the in itself and the for itself, then our contingency would be overthrown, right? So for every and each person, you would become your own foundation and your own justification. And this self-justification or self-foundation or self-cause is an impossibility, according to Sartre. It is a futile project. Simone de Beauvoir would call it just blatantly stupid. It's a stupid obsession with power, so to speak. More's notes on this gives us a bit more of a concise understanding of it, of what it is. He says that the desire to be God is fundamentally a desire for power. It is a desire to have, to possess the fullness, the completeness, and the density of the in itself while still remaining the for itself. And it's this that turns it into a futile passion, because this is literally impossible. And the consequence of the failure, in this sense, of the adoption of the response that, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, I'm a bit nervous. So, sorry, let me just recollect myself. So in this attempt to reach for power, so to speak, the in itself, the for itself tries to become the in itself. So the being that has no justification tries to seek for justification within its being, within overcoming this. And such a consciousness, according to Sartre, represents a self-motivated inauthenticity, which is consistent with seeking out a foundation in order to remove the absurdity of our facticity. Okay, so there's the important point that I think I missed as I led into this. In the realization of our contingency as freedom, as and in this realization that we have lost the foundation on which we stand, there is a futile grasping, so to speak, at various things to obtain or to get away from our facticity, essentially, to deny our freedom and to move into bad faith as a way to consolidate ourselves. And it is such a person that places value on the original project, according to More, so, whose relation to others will always involve a form of conflict, and in fact makes these people power seekers. So what is important, I guess, right now to take away from all those ramblings is, one, Sartre says that the fundamental project is also a part of our facticity. It is not something that we can get away from, but the pursuit of it is equally futile because it's not something we can reach. So within existentialism, then Sartre would make the claim that we ought to turn to freedom and abandon this project. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. We will get to there in a second. So More notes then, let me just change the slide. More notes then that salvation or deliverance in this sense cannot be realized until there is a radical move from the inauthentic state of being, that is the desire to be God, to a authentic mode of existence. The authentic mode of existence here is the acceptance of our contingent, superfluous, and unjustifiable existence. So again, the for itself, which is us, has a contingent, superfluous, and unjustifiable existence. And this desire to become the in itself is a desire to overcome this. It's a desire to deny this contingent nature of our existence as nothingness. So this conversion from then an inauthentic mode of existence to bad faith is from an inauthentic mode of existence as bad faith to a authentic existence in which freedom is the absolute value, according to More, is what Sartre means by the radical conversion. So the radical version, therefore, involves a change from the inauthentic to a authentic existence. The latter is a willful acceptance of one's freedom. As More says, for Sartre, the self-recovery of being, which was previously corrupted by the bad faith of the fundamental project. So this self-recovery is then authenticity. And the movement from the inauthentic to the authentic is what we will take to be the radical conversion. Okay. So how More employs this, and again, I am deliberately only doing very specific parts of this, as my project is not to re-articulate what More has already done. It is just to show how the radical conversion has the potential to cause a different mode of being and therefore a different mode of thinking, right? So here at the top of the screen, we have a quote from More. I do believe actually it's a quote from Sartre in More, in which Sartre says, in an oppressive situation, authentic liberation requires a self-recovery that enables one to have a lucid and clear consciousness of that situation and to resolutely accept it or struggle to change it. What is important for More here is that freedom in this sense can only, exist within a situation. What this means then for his perspective is that in a oppressive situation, authentic liberation requires a self-recovery that enables one to have this lucid and clear consciousness of a situation. He links this to Lewis Gordon, that notes to liberate ourselves from anti-Black racism, we also need a mediated ontology that would call for the recognition of contingency in itself. We need to admit at the bottom that our situation doesn't have to be as it is. We need to embrace the negative aspects of our existence in the form of existential or radical conversion. This then brings More to Heidegger, in which he links Heidegger's idea of thoroughness with Sartre's idea of facticity. They all overlap quite well. So just a brief discussion regarding that for these who are not familiar. Heidegger's concept of thoroughness, sometimes called accidents of birth, is the fact that we are thrown without any explanation into the world when we are brought into existence, into a world that's not of our own making. We do not possess any power over who, what, and how we are in this particular incarnation, right? So this is at birth, without explanation, we are literally thrown into existence, right? Before any conscious action or choice of our own, we find ourselves already born into a world, not as a disembodied cognito, but as particular bodies of certain shapes, colors, and appearances, so to speak. And our presence in the world is thus absurd and contingent for More, not only because the universe offers us no rational supported guidance or guarantees for our existence, so remember, for itself as an unjustifiable existence, but also because our bodies are, as it were, thrusted upon us without any consciousness of us having deserved them, according to More. In other words, though our embodiment is a necessary condition for our being in the world, our type of bodiliness is a contingent issue. So this is where More would then say that if we are, and this is in his project to address racism, if we are ontologically contingent beings, if our existence, including our racial makeup, is contingent, then no one can at all justifiably demand that or has a right to require that I recognize his or her claim to necessity. Now, just for a bit of context, this is in the light that within, for More, within the anti-Black world, there is a claim for necessity from the white body, right? The white person claims that their existence is a necessary existence, is not a contingent existence. But this for More is illogical. It simply does not make sense, because our condemnation to freedom, in the Sartrean sense, so the contingent nature of our existence, is the same for all beings. All beings are thrown into existence, and all beings, except the in itself, do not have justifiable existence. Your existence cannot claim any form of necessity. Therefore, More says racism or sexism, precisely because it's of contingency, requires a lucid consciousness of our contingency to generate resistance of a revolutionary nature. My freedom in that sense, therefore, sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. So to generate this resistance of a revolutionary nature. So what I've gathered More means here is in a true realization of just how free we are, how futile the God project is, and the acceptance of the contingent nature of our existence, and that we can change things because of this, allows for this elucidation of consciousness, or the elucidation of consciousness allows for that realization in turn, right? So Morris says to complete this movement, to have a revolutionary consciousness, so to speak, requires a revolutionary philosophy that shows the following. One, that human beings are unjustifiable, that their existence is contingent, and that neither they nor any the existential angst, and that there is no justification.
Werner, you seem to be moving in and out of consciousness. Certainly for me. I don't know if that's true for anyone else.
Again, for your existence, there's no purpose for your existence. Order established by human beings can be transitory, would refer to structural racism. Structure, it is a result of
The same for me, Andrea.
Oh dear. This is Werner, you've disappeared. Can you hear us? Oh dear. I think we've
He's not
lost.
speaking. He's speaking, but we can't hear him.
Oh goodness. Werner, you've actually muted for some reason. Something's happened.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, 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 yes.
Okay, that was very strange.
It's
My
okay.
apologies. I'll take it from the top of what I was saying, I guess. So
it was sorry, it was quite a while back.
okay.
I've lost track of your slides. We've also lost your slides. I don't know if that's
Okay. I was gonna say I heard a strange thing because the announcement that the meeting is being recorded was repeated. You know, in the beginning, if you sign in, it says this meeting is being recorded. I heard that again for some reason, but okay. How about now?
Yes, we can see your slides now.
Okay, great. So I'll just take it from here. I'm going to rush through a few things so I can get to the part of the argument that I think is the most important.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to take it just from More's understanding where if human beings are unjustifiable, that in order to have a existential philosophy that's useful here, More says this type of revolutionary requires a revolutionary philosophy that shows, one, that human beings are unjustifiable, that is, that their existence is contingent and that neither they nor any province has produced it. That is, as a result of this, any collective order established by human beings can be transcended towards other orders. Here, Sartre makes, according to More, a clear break from ontology into the ontic level, into the political level, revolutionary politics. Thus, in the realm of action, according to More, contingency generates some measure of optimism. If contingency is a source of nausea, then More argues that very contingency should provide some relief from it. In other words, none of the oppressed groups or individuals have to be what they are. Each could be something other than what he or she is and do otherwise. All are free and responsible for their situations in the ontological sense, which urges them on to freedom in the ontic sense, in which anything is possible. And nothing has to be the case that it is because of it contingency. This realization is part and partial the radical conversion, so to speak. This is what happens to the main character in Nausea when he looks at the chestnut tree and he is overwhelmed by his freedom, right? So when he experiences nausea, More makes the argument that this should generate an intense desire in the oppressed, the will to change what it is to what it ought to be, the desire to resolve to change their oppressive situation to a situation of freedom. So in that sense, then, my freedom is the thing that wrenches for More me away from my situation and opens myself up to possibility to change that situation. Okay, so what is important from this for the actual argument that I am making today is the following 4 points. 1, radical conversion means to move from the inauthentic existence to one of authenticity. This shift requires a realization of the superfluous nature of reality and self-recovery that enables one to have a lucid and clear consciousness of the reality of the situation we are in, which further requires acceptance of both of one's facticity and one's freedom. Remember, bad faith can be a denial of facticity or a denial of freedom. And freedom awakens me to the possibility of how I may be able to change my being, or how I may be able to be different in the world. Okay. So that being said, this then brings me to the ontological shift during psychedelic experiences and the case of nature relatedness. On the screen, you will see a sketched out version of the entirety of the argument in its most basic form. I make the claim that ecological destructive behaviors such as pollution can be seen as matters of bad faith because they deny the contingency of the Anthropocene and they continue the futile God project. In other words, they are an extension of this desire to become God. The radical conversion is necessary to overcome this. Altered states of consciousness may reveal the latter and awaken us to our freedom and so our possibilities. And the increase of nature relatedness and the subsequent connection between nature relatedness and conservation as a result of psychedelic experience supports that altered states of consciousness may awaken us to our freedom. All right, so what is nature relatedness? This can be described as one's level of self-identification and subjective sense of connectedness with nature. And as you will see in the preceding slides, here I've made use of quite a few scientific studies. I've put loose-handed references in for all of them to show that one, nature relatedness has been found to show a connection to conservation behavior, and 2, there is a strong link between nature relatedness and the psychedelic experience. So if you look at the second point, nature relatedness has been found to be a strong predictor of pro-environmental awareness, attitudes, and behaviors. And this was in a study titled, Do People Feel Connected to Nature? Do more to protect it. So if you feel more connected to nature, will you do more to protect it? All right. So before we get into accounts, the breakdown of the argument is the following, that the claim is that bad faith here would be to think that the world cannot be different from what it is, right? In the light of the ecological crisis, it is succumbing to a form of nihilism or cynicism and denying one's own agency. For nature relatedness, it would be to continue to believe that we are human beings, are separate and to some extent superior to nature, and therefore have a right to exploit nature. This returns to the bad faith of the original project of wanting to be God, because it's an extension of wanting to have this power to dominate over other beings. And then from the individual, it can take the very basic form of just a denial of freedom in statements such as, things have always been this way, they will never change, they are just what they are, etc. Making claims in bad faith as it denies the contingency of freedom, right? It denies the fact that things can be different because of the fact that our freedom is also contingent. All right. So here we have just two short quotes of patient reports in regards to psychedelic experiences before we jump more into the findings of nature relatedness. The first reads, before, and this is before having a psychedelic experience, I enjoyed nature. Now I feel a part of it. Before, I was looking at it as a thing, like a TV or a painting, but you are a part of it. There is no separation. There's no distinction. You are it. And the next one, it felt like sunshine twinkling. I felt like sunshine twinkling through leaves. I was nature. This comes from a paper on the accounts of increased connectedness and acceptance of the psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, done at the a Center for Psychedelic Research in the UK. So further evidence then for this idea that psychedelics do enhance nature relatedness, and that the experience is central to a moving from the act of bad faith, where there is a denial of such a relatedness, to the authenticity of the relatedness, can then be seen in the following cases. As this is perhaps not the furthest back, but this is quite a few years ago, in 1966, in the Variety of Psychedelic Experience. Master and Houston already argued that psychedelic experiences in natural settings can foster an empathetic connection to nature, and this provides a sense of humility within the larger project of where we as human beings exist in relation to nature. Goff also mentions that subjects undergoing LSD therapy sessions reporting a dissolution of boundaries and awe-inducing feelings of unity with nature during peak psychedelic experiences in the 1980s. As just the source. Then more recent resources, we have nature relatedness has been observed after the psychedelic experience across an entire sample of healthy participants, being important there, to values that remained stable between 2 to 4 weeks post-experience. Other research has showed with depressed patients that nature relatedness remained significantly elevated up to 12 months. There's also been some studies where nature relatedness has been shown to be increased. We'll see the conclusion in a second, for up to 2 years due to psychedelic experience. Oh, sorry, okay, there we go. So it is evident that there is a sense of nature relatedness that is increased during the psychedelic experience. I argue that this shows that there needed to be a realization during the experience that previous structures of thought, of conception, of the relation between humans and nature as perhaps a form of dualism or a dichotomy of some sense is not the only way to think about this. That the realization of the superfluidity of reality leads to the realization of the connectedness, that leads to the realization of this form of nature relatedness. So the argument is then that the realization of one's freedom coincides with the realization of one's possibility of being different in the world. That is a shift from bad faith about the superfluous nature of reality into its embrace. Being different in the world necessitates knowledge of the possibility of such a difference. In other words, the realization that existence, and as I mentioned before, the thinking about existence is not stuck in these rigid structures, as many may believe that it is, but it is indeed superfluous, and that this stands to be facilitated in the case of increased nature relatedness following a psychedelic experience. So the claim ultimately is that the Sartrean idea of moving away and abandoning the original project of wanting to become God, so the project of maintaining power and trying to necessitate one's and justify one's existence towards freedom as a contingent factor, allows us to realize just how superfluous reality is. And it's this superfluidity that allows for difference to become a possibility. But this possibility means nothing if we do not truly realize the extent to which it goes. And it's this extent that Sartre would say causes anxiety, because you're overcome with the extensiveness of your freedom, the condemnation of your freedom, right? So in the same way that you are condemned to be free, you are also not condemned to be steadfast, right? I hope that makes sense. I have skipped over quite a few things because I'm concerned with the time of the technical issues. So I'm going to leave it there, and hopefully some questions will allow us to get some clarity around everything. Thank you.
Okay, Werner, thanks so much. Yes. Yeah, there are lots of questions spinning around in my mind. But let me not dominate. Let me just see if there are people who would like to come in here. Either stick up your hand or maybe just put your camera on so I can see. Okay, well, while you gather your thoughts, okay, there's 100 things I want to ask you, but one of the things I would ask you now is just in very, very practical, real life, contemporary terms, how would this nature connectedness change, say, your being? How do you live differently from average academic? I don't know if there is such a thing as an average academic, but you know what I mean. You're an academic,
Yes.
you have to do academic things. What difference does it make in your life?
All right, so I did kind of skip over this part where there is a good amount of research that links nature relatedness to mental well-being, to a few other wellness things, and I think most importantly to a ecological consciousness. So a awareness of our impact and our symbiotic relationship with nature in that sense. So, I mean, this can be any extent of, instead of sitting in front of my computer and reading about existence, going for a walk in nature every day, all the way to taking active attempts to make a real difference, such as, I mean, what you do by removing indigenous plants and planting
The other way around.
other way around, sorry. My apologies. Removing alien plants and planting indigenous trees would be a perfect example of this, right? For me personally, it's also an understanding of not a domination culture where we as people are not on the top of nature, but we are in between it. And it's this in-betweenness with nature that I just think makes one more aware of your own impact, and then hopefully makes you less impactful.
Yes. Emma, but you are muted.
I knew that. Thank you so much, Werner. I really appreciate hearing from you, and I enjoy your work. And I really resonate on many of the elements, in particular the sort of the impact that this kind of altered state of consciousness or experience can have on how one perceives things, or in your sense, like what type of consciousness one has. I'm interested in how all of this links, because I'm familiar with some of this research through eco-psychology and the work coming out of ecotherapy, working with everyone from sort of substance misuse disorders through to everyday people having peak experiences, and how this links in to a shift in consciousness and a more ecologically minded or ecocentric sort of perception and things. So I think on one level, it also impacts your identity, your sense of, it links in with cohesion and social identity, because suddenly you're not just an atomistic me alone in the world, but you're part of everything. But what I'm interested in, what comes with that also, is like, it's a both and thing. Like in my experience personally, it's like a beautiful sense of feeling connected to everything, and then a also sense of deep sorrow, because now what the destruction of culture and of planet and of people's lives, in terms of even the most wealthy people, in terms of stress and depression and anxiety, all these things, suddenly it all becomes quite a lot to take on. Like, wow, if I'm connected to everything and I care about everything, I'm also got to carry the weight of that too. So there's just that dimension that I'm interested in and thought I would drop in. But I think we're linking into the same.
I do believe we are, and I will say something from what I think would be a Sartrean perspective on that, is you cannot have freedom without facticity. So what this means is you are in bad faith if you deny your freedom, you're in bad faith if you deny your facticity. So what comes with this interconnectedness is then a feeling that extends beyond yourself. It's a feeling with nature. It's a feeling with others. It's a feeling for the suffering of others. This is why I put the little short bit in there of More saying that there cannot be freedom that is not in a situation. Because I think what this means, this being in situation means, is that in order to truly embrace freedom, to truly embrace the revolutionary act of being different than say that which you were taught to be, you need to also take the bad with the good. You cannot face up to something. Let's say we take the example of the first thing that's coming to my mind is connection of animals, and then the consumption of animals. If you're going to eat meat and you're going to do it authentically, then you cannot deny that you are willing the suffering of animals. It is only through the acceptance of that you are free. And I think the same thing can be applied then for this ecological consciousness. You need to take the bad with the good. So therefore, it's not for the faint of heart. Sartre says it's only for the brave.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Can I ask you another quick question? So
Sure.
I'm hearing a whole lot, actually a better version of Sartre than is in the common kind of sense, which just says he's obsessed about freedom and and that's that. But it's a much more balanced, much more complex version of Sartre, which is nice to hear. But I'm hearing Nietzsche. So back to that, and I'm hearing that I'm hearing a whole lot of what was said 150 years ago. So my question is, how realistic is this kind of thinking? I mean, we hear it all the time. We say it to ourselves all the time. What is stopping us from actually living it?
All right. So this is where I think a consciousness shift is what is necessary. And this is why I think it is not unfounded to say that something like this ought to be facilitated through something like a psychedelic experience. I think it is not enough for us to conceive of these ideas. I think we need to very profoundly and very enactedly and embodiedly experience what it is like to be a part of the thing that we are hurting. Because with this realization, you realize you are hurting yourself. Or we hope you realize that you are hurting yourself. And I think there is a reasonable correlation between this increase in nature relatedness and this increase of self-identification with nature, which goes further than just a theoretical discussion of it if it's first-hand experience. And I think this first-hand experience will allow people or facilitate people to live differently. And that's what we want, right? We don't want to just think differently. We want to act differently in the world.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Janet.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Werner. And I found this very refreshing and interesting. I'm not familiar at all with the philosophy. And what I like about it is the sort of this idea of contingency and the agency that it gives to people to act, to change, and to imagine a different future. So it sort of overcomes that sort of structural determinist thinking. Like, it is what it is. You have to just accept it. This is how things are, etc. But there's also a sort of arrogance about this idea that you have to be special to undergo this conversion through some kind of psychedelic experience or whatever. It sounds a bit religious to me, like some special elite, like, or in Marxist Leninist theory, the conscious, you have to have this vanguard consciousness or something in order to embrace the freedom and the possibility of overcoming oppression, which is just, I find it quite a sort of elitist or arrogant approach. It's interesting anyway, thanks.
Thank you for your comment. I mean, it's a worthwhile criticism to engage with. Again, I rushed over these things, but I tried to make examples where you see both studies with individuals who have various forms of mental illness, and you have studies with healthy individuals, and you have studies over very long time periods, some of these being with academics, other being with people overcoming personal trauma, etc., to widen the scope of this applicability to, in a sense, speak to this. So Sartre by no means makes the claim that the radical conversion needs anything other than the realization of the contingency of freedom. And in Nausea, the novel, this happens almost impulsively to the main character, and he is not necessarily some bourgeoisie person, he is just a person, and he is overcome by the realization of his own freedom. And there's been a reasonable amount of literature on saying that art may facilitate this, that engagement with philosophy might facilitate this, that reading Sartre might facilitate this. But all of these things very much, I feel, fall into what you're saying, where there's somewhat of a necessity for expertise. So perhaps it's not an elitist sense in a class struggle, but there is a claim toward expertise to grasp this, to be able to engage in this consciousness shift. I think what is more beneficial of a psychedelic experience, or let's say an experience of altered states of consciousness, because I also do not believe that this is just for psychedelics. This is accessible to anyone. Anyone can engage in meditation. Now, you can't necessarily legally engage in psychedelic experience, etc. There is some loopholes to jump through, but you do not need to be, in my understanding, part of some specific elitist group to be able to undergo such a revelation. I will, however, say, when I first started engaging with this terminology, I found that just the term radical conversions to be problematic in its own sense, because it sounds religious. And Sartre reminds us consistently that he's an atheist, yet he makes use of this term. And this is the same term More uses, and it's the same term Lewis Gordon uses. So to carry the tradition, I guess I use it myself, but I do think there is some reason to your hesitancy.
Okay, thank you. I think we have, I've just given us roughly about an hour, so we've got a minute or two. If there's something somebody wants to jump in quick, Janet?
Yeah, thanks, Werner. Just to follow up, isn't it also true that there are many pre-capitalist cultures where people are much closer to nature? You know, the whole population is, in fact, embraces a philosophy of being at one with nature. And I mean, we've lost that. So in a way, this is like modern societies trying to reclaim something which has been lost. What do you think?
I agree. I think there is, I wouldn't instead of calling it a turn towards nature relatedness, it's a return towards nature relatedness. And I agree that there is an implication here for capitalism and industrialization. And in future research, I plan to address exactly that there is a loss of our primordial connection to nature due to this, and that perhaps there is a way to facilitate a connection back to it through altered states of consciousness, which has been practiced by these civilizations for much longer than capitalism has even been a thing.
Alex? Right. Alex, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Werner, for the presentation. I really enjoyed reading More. It's nice to hear of existentialist thinkers like him being brought into contemporary discussion, so thank you. And I'm someone who has experienced the great benefit of psychedelics and meditation, but I would appreciate your comment on this example. So I'm not sure if you've heard of Sam Harris, but he is a very influential, you might generously call public intellectual in the United States, in San Francisco, who has been a major proponent of meditation and substances that induce altered states of consciousness. But even after, I suppose, more than a decade of experienced meditation, and I assume many psychedelic trips, he remains nonetheless a very skilled rhetorician in facilitating the devastating violence in Gaza. And so I wonder, what would your comments be on something like that, and someone like him who has explored these avenues, but seems to be maybe, you know, overshadowed by bad faith, just to use your language. What would you?
Well, yes. So in Kerry Walter's article, on radical conversion, he addresses this, that in Sartrean pure reflection, so moving through the radical conversion, does not necessitate a commitment to the result. You can have the experience, but you will know within the realms of psychedelics, there is a necessity for integration. And this integration is still a very willful act that must be pursued with the end of changing the way of one's being. All that the altered state of consciousness allows is an intervention. It's a realization of possibility. But once that possibility is realized, it is still upon you to act towards your freedom. You can just deny your freedom and step comfortably back into your bad faith at any point if you desire it to be. And Sartre will be remarkably critical of this behavior, but this is the easier move. This is the move that does not take courage.
Thank you. I like the answer. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I think we're kind of edging towards having to close up. There's just one thing I just want to quickly slip in there, and that would be a question about nature and return to nature, and what exactly is nature, and is, for instance, art making and artifice part of nature, human part of nature, those kinds of questions I just want to slip in there in case you're going to do further research on this stuff. I do want to kind of
yeah, I mean, if you ask me, I will say yes. I will say anything that is created for the sake of creation and nothing.
Oh dear, we've lost you. All right. I think we're going to have to
More is a
Werner,
natural being,
I'm
is an
afraid...
expression of freedom. Can you hear me?
No, we lost you. So we don't have your answer for that one. we kind of lost you halfway. Oh no, and we've lost Werner again. Okay. This is yeah, time for us to stop battling over our technical detail. All right. So next week we'll be hearing from Helen Douglas, who, what did she? Oh yes, she's going to offer us some really dubious responses, she says, to our very good questions, guided by the tacit warning that sounds in nota bene. Note well, NB. So yeah, hopefully see you next week. And yeah, thanks for coming.